Bible in a Year, the Message Version, March 20, Numbers chapter 30, verse 1 through chapter 31, verse 54. Moses spoke to the heads of the tribe of the people of Israel. This is what God commands. When a man makes a vow to God or binds himself by an oath to something, he must not break his word. He must do exactly what he said. When a woman makes a vow to God and binds herself by a pledge as a young girl still living in her father's house, and her father hears of her vow or pledge but says nothing to her, then she has to make good on all her vows and pledges. But if her father holds her back when he hears of what she has done, none of her vows and pledges are valid. God will release her since her father held her back. If she marries after she makes a vow or has made some rash promise or pledge, and her husband hears of it but says nothing to her, then she has to make good on whatever she vowed or pledged. But if her husband intervenes when he hears of it, he cancels the vow or rash promise that binds her, and God will release her. Any vow or pledge taken by a widow or divorced woman is binding on her. When a woman who is living with her husband makes a vow or takes a pledge under oath and her husband hears about it but says nothing and doesn't say she can't do it, then all her vows and pledges are valid. But if her husband cancels them when he hears about them, then none of those vows and pledges that she made are binding. Her husband has canceled them, and God will release her. Any vow and pledge that she makes may be or her detriment can be either affirmed or annulled by her husband. But if her husband is silent and doesn't speak up day after day, he confirms her vows and pledges. She has to make good on them. By saying nothing to her when he hears of them, he binds her in them. If, however, he cancels them sometime after he hears of them, he takes her guilt on himself. These are the rules that God gave Moses regarding conduct between a man and his wife and between a father and his young daughter who is still living at home. God spoke to Moses, "Avenge the people of Israel on the Midianites. Afterward, you will go to be with your dead ancestors." Moses addressed the people, "Recruit men for a campaign against Midian to exact God's vengeance on Midian. 1,000 from each tribe of Israel must go to war. A fighting force of 1,000 from each tribe of Israel, 12,000 in all, was recruited. Moses sent them off to war, 1,000 from each tribe, and also Phinehas, son of Eleazar, who went as priest to the army, in charge of holy vessels and the signaling bugles. They attacked Midian, just as God had commanded Moses, and killed every last man. Among the fallen were Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. They also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword. The people of Israel took the Midianite women and children captive and took all their animals and herds and goods as plunder. They burned to the ground all the towns in which Midianites lived and also their camps. They looted and plundered everything and everyone belonging to the people and animals. They took it all, captives and spoils and plunder, back to Moses and Eleazar the priest and the company of Israel, where they were camped on the plains of Moab at Jordan, Jericho. Moses, Eleazar, and all the leaders of the congregation went to meet the returning army outside the camp. Moses was furious with the army officers. the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, as they came back from battlefield. "What's this? You've let these women live." They're the ones who, under Balaam's direction, seduced the people of Israel away from God in the mess at Peor, causing the plague that hit God's people. Finish your job. Kill all the boys. Kill every woman who has slept with a man. The younger women who are virgins you can keep alive for yourselves. Now here's what you are to do. Pitch tents outside the camp. All who have killed anyone or touched a corpse must stay outside the camp for 7 days. Purify yourselves and your captives on the 3rd and 7th day. Purify every piece of clothing and every utensil, everything made of leather, goat hair, or wood. Eleazar the priest then spoke to the soldiers who had fought in the battle. This is the ruling from Revelation that God gave Moses: gold, silver, bronze, iron, tin, and lead, and anything else that can survive fire must be passed through the fire. Then it will be ritually purified. It must also be ritually washed by the water of the cleansing. Further, whatever cannot survive fire must be put through the water. On the 7th day, scrub your clothes. You will be ritually clean. Then you can return to camp. God said to Moses, "I want you and Eleazar the priest and the family leaders in the community to count the captives, people, and animals. Split the plunder between the soldiers who fought the battle and the rest of the congregation. Then tax the spoils that go to the soldiers at the rate of 1 life out of 500, whether human, cattle, donkeys, or sheep. It is a God tax given from their half share to be turned over to Eleazar the priest on behalf of God. Tax the congregation's half share at the rate of 1 life out of 50, whether persons, cattle, donkey, sheep, goat, or other animals. Give this to the Levites who are in charge of the care of God's dwelling." Moses and Eleazar followed through with what God had commanded Moses. The rest of the plunder taken by the army: 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, 32,000 women who were virgins. The half share for those who had fought in the war: 337,500 sheep with a tax of 675 for God. 36,000 cattle with a tax of 72 for God. 30,500 donkeys with a tax of 61 for God. 16,000 people with a tax of 32 for God. Moses turned the tax over to Eleazar the priest as God's part, following God's instructions to Moses. The other half share for the Israelite community that Moses set apart from what was given to the men who fought the war was 337,500 sheep, 36,000 cattle, 30,500 donkeys, 16,000 people. From the half share going to the people of Israel, Moses, just as God had instructed him, picked one out of every 50 persons and animals and gave them to the Levites, who were in charge of maintaining God's dwelling. The military officers, commanders of 1,000 and commanders of 100, came to Moses and said, "We have counted the soldiers under our command, and not a man is missing. We've brought offerings to God from the gold jewelry we got: armlets, bracelets, rings, earrings, ornaments, to make atonement for our lives before God." Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from them, all that fine crafted jewelry. In total, the gold from the commanders of 1,000 and hundreds that Moses and Eleazar offered as a gift to God weighed about 600 pounds, all donated by the soldiers who had taken the spoils. Moses and Eleazar took the gold from the commanders of 1,000 and hundreds and brought it to the tent of meeting to serve as a reminder for the people of Israel before God. Luke chapter 4, verse 1 through verse 30. Now Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wild. For 40 wilderness days and nights he was tested by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and when the time was up, he was hungry. The devil, playing on his hunger, gave the first test. Since you're God's son, command this stone to turn into a loaf of bread. Jesus answered by quoting Deuteronomy. It takes more than bread to really live. For the second test, he led him up and spread out all the kingdoms of the earth on display at once. Then the devil said, "They're yours in all their splendor to serve your pleasure. I'm in charge of them all and can turn them over to whomever I wish. Worship me and they're yours, the whole works." Jesus refused, again backing his refusal with Deuteronomy. Worship the Lord your God and only the Lord your God. Serve him with absolute single-heartedness. For the third and final test, the devil took him up to Jerusalem and put him on top of the temple. He said, "If you are God's son, jump. It's written, isn't it, that he has placed you in the care of angels to protect you. They will catch you. You won't so much as stub your toe on a stone." "Yes," said Jesus, "and it is also written, 'Don't you dare tempt the Lord your God.'" That completed the testing. The devil retreated temporarily, lying in wait for another opportunity. Jesus returned to Galilee, powerful in the Spirit. News that he was back spread through the countryside. He taught in their meeting places to everyone's acclaim and pleasure. He came to Nazareth, where he had been raised. As he always did on the Sabbath, he went into the meeting place. When he stood up to read, he was handed the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. Unrolling the scroll, he found the place where it is written, "God's Spirit is on me. He chose me to preach the message of good news to the poor. Send me to announce pardon to the prisoners and recover sight to the blind, to set the burdened and battered free, to announce this is God's time to shine." He rolled up his scroll and handed it back to the assistant and sat down. Every eye in the place was on him, intent. Then he started in. "You've just heard Scripture. Make history. It came true just now in this place." All who were there, watching and listening, were surprised at how well he spoke, but they also said, "Isn't this Joseph's son, the one we've known since he was a kid?" He answered, "I suppose you're going to quote the proverb, 'Doctor, go heal yourself.' Do here in your hometown what we heard you did in Capernaum." Well, let me tell you something. No prophet is ever welcomed in his hometown. Isn't it a fact that there were many widows in Israel at the time of Elijah during that 3.5 years of drought when famine devastated the land? But the only widow to whom Elijah was sent was Sarepta in Sidon. And there were many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, but the only one cleansed was Naaman in Cyrene. That set everyone in the meeting place seething with anger. They threw him out, banishing him from the village, then took him to a mountain cliff at the edge of the village to throw him to his doom. But he gave them the slip and was on the way. Psalm chapter 63, verse 1 through verse 11. A David psalm when he was out in the Judean wilderness. "God, you're my God. I can't get enough of you. I've worked up such hunger and thirst for God, traveling across dry and weary deserts. So here I am in the place of worship, eyes open, drinking in your strength and glory. In your generous love, I am really living at last. My lips brim praises like fountains. I bless you every time I take a breath. My arms wave like banners of praise to you. I eat my fill of prime rib and gravy. I smack my lips. It's time to shout praises. If I'm sleepless at night, I spend the hours in grateful reflection because you've always stood up for me. I'm free to run and play. I hold on to you for dear life, and you hold me steady as a post. Those who are out to get me are marked for doom, marked for death, bound for hell. They'll die violent deaths. Jackals will tear them limb from limb, but the king is glad in God. His true friends spread the joy, while small-minded gossips are gagged for good. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 20 through verse 21. God can't stand deceivers, but oh, how he relishes integrity. Count on this: the wicked won't get off scot-free, and God's loyal people will triumph.